The Russians are significantly better than they were. Ukrainians are better than they are, but they have adapted. There's nothing like getting beaten up and your nose punched and you survive to learn and survive. And so you do have a basis of trained veteran Russian troops, though the overwhelming majority still are raw conscripts, raw recruits that are being fed into this charnel house now that was Avdiivka, and now being, in the fights now, these awful fights around Kharkiv, in Lysky and Volochansk. So it just goes on.
I wanted to get your thoughts on what we've been seeing in Russia in the past few weeks, in particular the changes in the Russian Ministry of Defense, and with Andrei Belyasov becoming the new defense minister, and the way the Kremlin appears to be trying to really sort of bring together the economy with the war economy, I suppose you could say, the private economy with the war economy, and putting potentially Russia onto a permanent war footing. It's an argument that some analysts have been advancing now, that you are seeing Russia moving towards a permanent war footing. Do you agree with that?
We've heard the term that Mark Galeotti threw out there, Russia and Putin's forever war. And clearly, Putin and Russia, with Russia, have put Russia on an existential thinking basis in a way that the West, I don't think, fully comprehends. And Putin has made this now a struggle for Russia's existence, its principles and mores, its people, its land, the Western threat, and a lot of this narrative is the narrative that Stalin adopted when the Nazis invaded in 1941, and then all of a sudden he started to call out patriotic Russia, patriotic Soviet Union, and Putin and the regime is playing all those patriotic terms and decadent NATO and the corrupt West and U.S. led CIA, anti-Russian cabal, so they have moved psychologically first, and they're now materially working toward that into more of a war footing. And that goes with the Andrei Belyasov, the new Minister of Defense, who is a civilian, I guess you would call technocrat, that has been in the system and has Putin's trust. Replaced, I think, increasingly the figurehead Shoigu, who I think was frankly overmatched by all this, and had not been a very, very good war leader. And then a whole bunch of sackings. I mean, they fired the deputy Mindef, Timur Ivanov, for corruption. Arrested him. And then another was Deputy Minister of Defense Alexander Fomin, who we knew in our time as a officer working on the General Staff, Ministry of Defense in Moscow. What is extraordinary is that I came to Moscow in 2012, in the summer of 2012. And at that time, just 2 months afterwards, and Anatoly Serdyukov, the Russian Minister of Defense, was fired, moved on for corruption, and in came Shoigu, Sergei, and General Valery Gerasimov. And until a couple weeks ago, they had been there for 12 years. That doesn't happen in any country in the West. But let's look at it. This is where we go back to Game of Thrones. It's trust. Putin trusted Shoigu, and he's moved him to the, show face to the National Security Council, where Dmitry Medvedev was, and bringing in new people. But clearly, there's with this new group coming in, it's more business-like. Clearly industrial base is up there. They have terrible, they're working to be able to, build new tank lines and T-90s, not a lot now, about 50 a month or something. But it's they're working at rebuilding. They're absolutely broken. The Ukrainians just ravaged, as we all know, in the first, especially year, Russian military materially and psychologically. Russian military, they're beefing it up, bringing in a lot of recruits, conscripts, but there is increasingly, we're seeing our advertisements and push. They're portraying to the Russian people that you volunteer. This is a fight for our existence. And there is a concern that this is as much becoming, it's still Putin's war, but it's more and more, James, Russia's war. And all these things have, I think, staying power in mind. I really, really struggle in seeing how Putin will be satisfied, quote unquote, with buffer zones in Ukraine. He'd like that to shell Kharkiv, but deep down, I believe he wants to again, as he did in 2022, ultimately want to finish the Ukrainian government and its independence and put it under Russian suzerainty. So yeah, the bringing in Belousov was important, and we're seeing, we're seeing. Can we believe that just 9-10 months ago we had Prigozhin, Prigozhin with his drive to Moscow? That was just 9-10 months ago. And we're all kind of, is the Putin regime going to survive this? And they have. I mean, they've shown resilience in all of this, a troubling resilience, but also with this Mother Russia, it gives, I think, Putin and the regime the carte blanche to be more authoritarian domestically. And they have been really hard on opposition, not like Stalin was, where they all got taken and shot somewhere, but ruthlessly too. I mean, they killed Navalny. Can you believe that was just 3 months ago? And so there is a lot to weigh. To come back to your question, Ukraine is fighting for its life, friends. It is, and they're exhausted. They've proven to be great fighters, and they adapt. But they have significant manpower shortages, where the Russians, with their mobilizations and call-ups, will continue just to throw forces into the meat grind. Apparently, the latest rounds around Kharkiv, they did get surprised, but I always worried with the fights along the Donetsk line, the Donbass line, that the lines extended out north of Kharkiv and then out towards Sumy and Chernihiv out in the west were always very, very vulnerable. And we're seeing that now. The Russians are significantly better than they were. Ukrainians are better than they are, but they have adapted. There's nothing like getting beaten up and your nose punched and you survive to learn and survive. And so you do have a basis of trained, veteran Russian troops, though the overwhelming majority still are raw conscripts, raw recruits that are being fed into this charnel house now that was Avdiivka, and now being, in the fights now, these awful fights around Kharkiv, in Lysky and Volochansk. So it just goes on. Last thing, the technology. It's getting, in many ways, with all the high tech, it's getting more viscerally brutal on the elemental way, and we've seen just again the brute force on force artillery and shells and and all that we've talked about, these awful glide bombs that we're hearing about, that a Su-20-35 or Su-20-34 can, out of range, launch them from 50 kilometers away, and with some basic GLONASS satellite comms can get pretty close to a target. It's sort of like a cruise missile bomb, a ton. And when you drop, they were used around Avdiivka, and then it's certainly right, Volochansk. This is crushing to defenders in the trenches and everything else in the cities. And I just try to think about what it must be like for the Ukrainian fighter, where a lot of them can't be replaced. Meaning they're there, and the rotation system has gotten a lot harder and harder because there are not as many troops to come in, and they've had to call up 25-year-olds. They're trying to save the youth of Ukraine. Most of the fighters on Ukraine, the active duty, if you can believe, in the fronts are between 40 and 43 years old. Can you believe that? So this is a grind, and it goes on over time, and I think that's part of Putin's strategy. It's going to wear them down. And at what point is there, in their minds, though we don't see it anytime soon, do the Ukrainians actually start to break? Because this is as desperate of defense, sustained defense, that we've seen in modern times. And the 6 months lost in my own Congress and in the West, and with getting Ukraine munitions at a critical time, the Russians were really able to, I think, take advantage of that. They're much smarter than they were 2 years ago, though not necessarily. We're better. Ukrainians are better, but the Russians are much improved.